Hello Ross Valley community, this is your Superintendent Tyler Graff coming to you with another RVSD budget update. We did one of these last year for the 24-25 school year, and here's the 25-26 version. Many of you gave good feedback around this budget update, and we want to make sure we share that information with you and are transparent with the community. So without further ado, let's get into it. Just a reminder, many of you saw this last year if you watched the video. This is kind of what the local control funding formula looks like. You get money per student, so for every student you have in your district, you get a certain level of funding. Different levels of funding for different grade spans you can see there at K3, 4, 6, middle school, and then in high school. And you see the little dollar signs below those blue students. There's additional money in the K3 grade span and in the high school grade span. And what that does is basically gives you more support early on as students are kind of entering into the school system, and then additional money as you're transitioning students to the workplace or to college. And then the calculator actually adds additional money for low-income students, English language learners, or what we call multilingual learners, foster youth, or homeless students. So you can see that with the little orange section there with the orange students. That's called supplemental funding. The Ross Valley School District doesn't get much supplemental funding because most of our families are at least middle income, if not higher income, so we don't see a ton of supplemental dollars come into our district. And then you can see the little blue schoolhouse at the bottom. When there's a large concentration of low income, multilingual learners, foster youth, or homeless students, districts get additional money to serve those students, because when there's that many students in a school, there's kind of a acknowledgement that that requires more service. So we do not receive any concentration funds at our school district. So once the state takes a look at the LCFF calculator and all of the student demographics in the district, they spit out a revenue number for the district as a target. And they start looking at local property taxes. And if the local property taxes don't meet that LCFF revenue number, then the state comes in and tops it off to get it to that LCFF calculation. Most districts in the state of California are LCFF districts where they're getting state aid because their local property taxes don't quite meet the LCFF calculation. Some years we are LCFF, some years we are this next funding calculation, which is called basic aid. However, many districts in higher income areas or more affluent areas like Marin County are basic aid, and what that means is essentially the LCFF calculator comes in, says the amount of dollars that a district needs, and then the property taxes meets that and usually exceeds that LCFF number. And when there's the excess revenue generated through property taxes, then the community actually gets to keep that money to fund their students. So we have quite a few basic aid districts in Marin County. So this chart, many of you have probably seen it last year, actually kind of shows some of those LCFF students on the left-hand side, LCFF districts, I'm sorry, and then the basic aid districts on the right side. So you can see that San Rafael and Novato are both state aid districts where the LCFF calculator was not met by local property taxes, and the state comes in and gives additional funding. A lot of the reason that both of those districts are in state aid is because of the high numbers of low-income, foster youth, homeless students, and multilingual learners that are in both San Rafael and Novato. So they generate, $6 to $12 million more than the state minimum in order to serve their students. And then on the right side, you can see most of the districts are actually basic aid. This year, we are also basic aid, and we have about $500,000 above the state minimum level of funding. So the LCFF calculator was applied, and we had about $500,000 more generated through our local property taxes. You can see other districts have different levels, and they're much deeper into basic aid. You can see Ross, with about 300 students, has $3 million above the state minimum. Mill Valley has 7 million, Reed 10 million, Tam has upwards of $26 million, almost $27 million above the state minimum. So you can kind of see that Ross Valley, Miller Creek, and to an extent Kentfield and Larkspur are kind of sitting down at the base funding from the state. That's part of why our budget tends to be a challenge year in and year out. And this is actually what it looks like on a per pupil basis. So you can see us down there at the very bottom. We're about the 5th or 6th largest district in the county, so one of the larger districts in the county, and we generate about $11,774 per student. And you can see there on the right-hand side, there's the state average for elementary districts, which we are, is $14,449. So you can see we're well below the state average in terms of revenue generation. And in fact, if you look at the other red circle I have there for Santa Fe City Schools Elementary, if we had about that much money in LCFF revenues, we would not be asking for a parcel tax increase. That's about what we need to be able to be competitive with salaries and maintain our excellent programs. But the delta between the 11,700 and that 13,600 is pretty significant, and that's where we need to augment with a parcel tax. So here's a comparison of the 4 lowest funded districts in the county. You can see Kentfield, Larkspur, Corte Madera, us, and Miller Creek. They're kind of at the bottom of that inverted curve we showed a few slides ago. All 4 of these districts supplement their LCFF revenue through a local parcel tax. You can see right here that Miller Creek's at $578 this year. We're at $720. Larkspur at $1,053, and Kentfield at $1,842. So you can see we're kind of on the lower end of the dollar amount. In addition to that, our annual inflation rate over there on the right side is a little bit on the conservative side as well, 3% as compared to a couple districts there with 5% inflation rates. And then our term is the lowest term at just 8 years. So you can see overall we have a relatively conservative parcel tax that's pretty reasonable, and increasing this would put us more in line with Larkspur, Corte Madera in order to meet our financial obligations, maintain student programs, and ensure our teachers are paid a living wage. And here you can see our numbers for the school year. This is updated most recently on September 17th, so pretty close to unaudited actuals. And a couple things I want to point out here on this slide. First and foremost, if you look at the 2022-23 school year revenues right above that red line, all the way to the 25-26 revenues, you can actually see the district is either right at about or lower revenue this year than it was 4 years ago. We all know that prices have increased, salaries have increased in that time, yet revenue is lower. So this is part of the challenge here, that LCFF calculator and the low tax basis across Fairfax and San Anselmo, with lots of residents living in their homes for 30 plus years or passing them down to their next of kin, has kept this revenue pretty low. And then you can kind of see down here at the yellow line, back in 21-22 and 22-23, we were adding money to the reserves, which was a good thing at the time, but was maybe not going to teacher salaries the way the community had hoped. But in 23-24, when we closed the books, we were at deficit spending of just over $500,000. 24-25, we just closed the books on that and unaudited actuals, and we deficit spent last year to the tune of $2.6 million, and are projecting pretty similar numbers this school year, deficit spending by about $2.3 million. So you can see we're right here in the middle of a pretty significant fiscal cliff. And although things look a little bit better in the 26-27 and 27-28 school years, there's still deficit spending to the tune of $600,000 to $700,000. So the budget woes are still right here in front of us. And really, when we think about like what got us here as a district, it's largely that LCFF calculator. We get the state minimum amount of revenue from the state to the tune of about $3,000 per student less than the average school district in the state. So you can see in this chart that we have been pretty aggressively spending down our reserves. Back in the 22-23 school year, you see we had That's kind of the peak of our reserves at 25.7%. 25% is about the statewide average for elementary schools. As we closed books last year, we went down to 23%, and we're just closing books this year for last school year, and we're showing 15.8% for the end of the 24-25 school year. So our projections for the end of this school year takes us all the way down to 10%, which is what our board asks us not to go below in the third year out. And you can see there in the third year out, we're at 5.7 in the 27-28 school year. The state requires us to be at 3%. Like I just said, the board wants us to be at 10%. The California Association of School Business Officials has a recommendation to stay at 17%. And like I also said, elementary districts across the state average about 25%. So you can see we're getting pretty low, and that's starting to be a concern for me, our CBO, and the board. So this is something to pay close attention to over the next few months and obviously few years as well. So in this slide, you can see the 4 comparison districts that we've been discussing, the lowest funded 4 districts in the county, and what raises they've given over the last 5 years. You can see Kentfield there at the top end of the spectrum has given 23% over the last 5 years, and we're down here at the bottom at 15.84%. However, we haven't settled for this school year, so that percentage may change, although our budget is very tight this year, and we're projecting, like I said earlier in earlier slides, over a $2 million deficit. So this is the 4 lowest funded districts in the county, and if you threw in districts like Reed or Ross or Tam, you might see much higher percentages than the percentages you're seeing here. Here's a comparison. Last year I did a comparison of salaries just of these bottom 4, which are the 4 comparison districts that I've been referencing throughout the presentation. But I thought it would be helpful just to kind of see in context what other districts are paying. And you can see there's only one district that pays first-year teachers less than us, and that's Novato. Every other district in the county pays more. So when you're talking about recruiting new teachers, this makes it very difficult to recruit great new teachers to our district because they can go get the same job essentially for $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 more than we pay. So this is a real problem when it comes to retention. And in fact, during last year's recruitment season, we probably lost about 5 or 6 candidates who were tentatively, accepted a job with us and then found a job for more pay in another district and ended up leaving us, and we had to go out and find a replacement for them. So that happened quite a few times this year. And then if you look on the far end, on the ending cell, and these are the most experienced teachers, the ones with the highest education, some of the best teachers in our district, they're getting paid anywhere between $10,000 and $30,000 less than their colleagues across the county. This is all salaries from the 24-25 school year. Lots of districts have already settled with their union partners for the 25-26 school year, so these numbers are artificially low. You can see Tam has already settled for 5%, Reed has settled for 5%, Mill Valley for an additional 2%, Ross for an additional 5%, Novato for 2.4%, Kentfield for 4%, and Larkspur Corte Madera for 3%. So you can add those percentages onto this to really see the real numbers of how far behind the Ross Valley School District is. And you can also see on the left-hand side, I put the average salary. So this is actually taking the real data, taking all the teachers, where they are on the salary schedule, and averaging that out to show that these numbers aren't artificial. We're not paying a lot of teachers a lot of money. Our average teacher is getting paid $93,000, and that is significantly low. $10,000 below most other districts here, if not more. One thing to note there, you can see the San Rafael High School District has an average of $120,000, but aren't the highest paid in the pay scale, which kind of shows you that they have mostly teachers towards the top end of their salary schedule, where these other districts are kind of closer to having the average. Novato kind of tends to have a little bit younger teachers, newer teachers early on in the salary schedule because their average is kind of on the lower end of their salary schedule. So a little weedy on this slide, but essentially just going to show that recruiting new teachers is really difficult because we don't pay very well on the early end, and retaining great talent is very difficult on the top end because we don't pay very well. And this is largely a function, almost exclusively a function, of the LCFF calculator that we talked about early on, and the county-wide low revenue that we have. So a lot of people are asking, what are you doing to make amends with this budget and balance this budget? And here are some things that we've done over the last 5 years. We've been cutting positions for the last 5 years, trying to make sure our budget is fiscally responsible. When you look at this, anything that's in italics is actually a district office position. So not necessarily administrator, but some of them are administrator positions, but they are district office non-teaching positions. Anything that's not is kind of more student facing. So you can see we cut some library specialists back in 2020, but we also cut someone from our IT team and a custodian at the district office as well. 2021, we eliminated a director of human resources, one of our administrators. That's a job that I do in addition to our assistant superintendent. We both kind of share that job now. We cut a couple other positions at the district office, and I just want to jump down to 2025. Our most recent budget cuts of about $700,000. We cut guest support teachers at each site, some tech platform use. We increased class size at White Hill. We've kind of cut half of our counseling program and our kindergarten aides and librarians. The reason I'm saying kind of cut is that we are using grant funding that supports the counselors for this year and next, but beyond that, we don't have any money for the counselors, and we will have to cut those positions. And with the kindergarten aides and the librarians, our PTAs have really stepped up to fund those next year. So we're lucky to have that community support, but those are kind of on thin ice, those two positions. So we've been doing a lot of cutting, started at the district office, started with some administrators, and now we're basically cutting down closer to the bone and impacting student programs and school sites. This is what we said would happen if Measure E didn't pass, and we're following through on what we said we would do. At the time when I presented this slide last year, it felt pretty dramatic, and it was kind of the minimum that we needed to do. So we actually implemented the first $500,000 of cuts. You can see the things highlighted in yellow there. Some of them I mentioned on the earlier slide. We actually did have to consider some deeper cuts, and that's the counseling services, librarians, and kindergarten aides that I talked about. And we're unsure about salary increases this year. We said that we were going to have a hard time increasing salaries if this hadn't passed. We have not finalized negotiations with our union, so this is still a question mark, but that's going to be a challenge right there. Now, a renewed or increased parcel tax would fund a number of different things, but the two main things would be to increase teacher salaries so we're recruiting and retaining excellent talent for our students, and then to maintain student programs. And you see on this slide a few of those things listed. Particularly, the one I want to point out is the second bullet point there, where we're examining our systems of supports, ensuring that all students are meeting or exceeding grade level standards in English language arts and math, making sure there's additional support for special ed students, and bringing someone on that speaks Spanish to help engage our Spanish-speaking community as well. And then this would also help minimize our structural deficit, attract and retain high-quality talent, and maintain the excellent programs that we have here at the Ross Valley. So what would happen if a parcel tax renewal and increase didn't pass in one of the next two statewide elections? We've got two statewide elections coming up, one in June of this school year, June 2026, and then again next November 2026. These are our backup plans, kind of our plan B if a parcel tax renewal and increase doesn't pass. First and foremost, if it doesn't pass in June of 2026, we're going to have to consider some deeper cuts to the tune of about $500,000 to $1 million. And that's going to be student programs. That's all we have left to cut. So we're talking about reducing elective courses in middle school from 2 electives to 1 elective, further reducing our counseling programs at the elementary school level and potentially our middle school as well, eliminating certificated PE teachers. Right now we have certificated teachers that teach PE. That burden would be put on our classroom teachers. Would have to negotiate that with our union, but it is a large expense that we're going to have to take a close look at. Also, intervention support for struggling students. And what we've seen so far is that there are schools with more intervention support are actually seeing an increase in student achievement, both in math and language arts. So this is a key program. It's not necessarily a classroom teacher position, but it does support our classroom teachers and ultimately our students with academic excellence. So that's a key program that we'd like to keep in place. And then we're going to have to consider cutting our TK program. Right now we have, it's kind of the same timeline as our kindergarten classes. We might have to reduce that to a half-day program. It is an expensive program to run because it's a small school, or it's a small student-teacher ratio, and our community really loves the program. I think our TK program is really fantastic. We've had great enrollment numbers this year with our TK, but we may have to cut back on that because we just don't have the funding for it. Additionally, salary increases will likely continue to stagnate, and those other districts will continue to outpace us in the salaries they're able to give, and our teachers will start leaving at an increased rate the further away other districts get from us. So that's kind of some big implications that would have to start implementing right at the end of the school year if a parcel tax renewal and increase wasn't passed. Now, if it doesn't happen in November of 2026, then we're talking about really serious implications. And I know as I say this, it sounds dramatic, but this is our plan. We're likely going to have to close a school, if not 2 schools. And what that would look like is we'd be putting portable buildings on the grass lots that we have, so we can accommodate 400 to 600 students per school site, and would have 2 elementary schools. That would make commuting more difficult and traffic more difficult, and ultimately have a big impact on our community as a whole. We'll continue to see salary stagnation. Again, we're gonna lose some of our fantastic teachers if that continues. And then if something doesn't happen in 2027, and there are only special elections in 2027, so if there's not a parcel tax increase or renewal in a special election in 2027, we're likely going to go into state receivership within 6 to 18 months. And that means we're losing local control here in Fairfax and San Anselmo of our schools. The state will be making decisions for our school board. So I think that's something that's real. And if you've been following the news, you'll see places like Oakland and Hayward have been in state receivership. Oakland worked really hard to get out of state receivership. It took them 20 years. And they got out of state receivership last year and are on the brink of going right back in. I don't think that Fairfax and San Anselmo are interested in losing local control of their schools, so that's going to be kind of a really important inflection point for our community. So here are a few things that we can do in order to help alleviate some of the pressure on the budget. First and foremost is send your kids to school. So attendance is really important. I want to give everybody huge kudos. We had our highest attendance numbers in 4 or 5 years last year. We had 95% of our students coming to school every single day over the course of the year. I'd love to see that number get up to 95.5 or 96%, so we're still pushing folks to send their kids to school every day. Help with increased enrollment. We're seeing higher enrollment numbers this year. We're projected to have higher enrollment numbers in the future. So tell your neighbors how great our schools are. Tell them the stories about your experiences on campus and help bring them into our schools. You can participate on the Budget Advisory Committee. We've had some exceptional families participate and staff participate on that committee. And your voice matters to us, so we want you on that committee. If you're interested, please reach out to me. You can also donate to YES. The YES Foundation fully funded our art and music programs this year for the first time in a long time. They met their goal of $1 million, and that helped us not cut the budget even deeper this year. So I want to give a big shout out to all of you who donated to Yes and to the Yes Foundation for their continued support. And then you can get engaged with any potential parcel tax initiatives in the future. Our board hasn't voted on anything at this point, so there's no ballot measure out there. We're unsure about what date we're going to go for, but when that comes up and after the board votes on it, the community needs to get involved, and we kind of hand the process over to the community. So if you're interested, participating on that committee would be really important. And here's some of the next steps. So we had a parcel tax town hall on September 10th. We've got another one coming out on the 25th. And the board will consider the next steps in December, January. And that's where they'll vote whether they're going to go out for a parcel tax renewal and increase on the June ballot or next November's ballot. So keep an eye out for that. And please do attend those board meetings to have your voice heard. All right, so that is our budget update for the 25-26 school year. If you have questions, do not hesitate to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to get into the weeds with this budget. It is a complex source of revenues and expenditures, and there's lots of misinformation out in the community about our budget, so don't hesitate to reach out directly to me. I'm happy to give you an answer. Transparency is one of the principles that I stand on, and if you're interested in learning more, please reach out. Thank you for making it this far, and I look forward to seeing you in the future.